Good morning. It's a real honor for us to be able to host the Louisiana Supreme Court on the Northwestern campus as they hear oral arguments here for the first time since 1986. It's been about a quarter of a century since the court has been on our campus. And it's really altogether appropriate that they should hold their meetings on our campus like this, these kinds of sessions, because there was a time during the days when the Supreme Court justices rode the circuit of the state because their domicile in New Orleans was not quite as accessible as it is today. In fact, travel to the New Orleans area could be arduous and very inconvenient. So really, we're grateful to share this kind of experience with the court and to share it with you as well. And having the court here this particular year really has historic significance for this community, for the court, and for the state of Louisiana. We're celebrating our bicentennial as a state. In this session, the court will begin its commemoration in 2013 of its bicentennial. And as those of us in the Natchitoches area know, Natchitoches is preparing in a couple of years to celebrate the tricentennial of its founding in 1714. This particular session is also especially meaningful because of the fact that Louisiana Supreme Court Chief Justice Catherine Kitty Kimball has announced her plans to retire at the end of this term after serving as a justice faithfully and admirably for 20 years. Well, we're deeply grateful to the court for providing this particular opportunity for the Northwestern students, for students from area schools, for other people in our community to see the court's work firsthand and to gain an even better appreciation for the role and the work that the court plays for our state. So this is very special to us in that regard. The Northwestern family, our students, our faculty and staff and alumni, as well as the good people of the city of Natchitoches and area capacities around here, join me in welcoming to the oldest city in Louisiana, the highest court in the land, as it were, at least for the state of Louisiana, the Louisiana Supreme Court, headed by Chief Justice Kimball, aided well by its staff, and of course, the justices themselves perform admirable roles in their respective capacities. So this is really just one of those signal honors for the community, for the university. We're grateful to be a part of it. And at this point, I'd like to introduce to you Justice Jeff Victory of Shreveport, Louisiana, who represents our district on the Louisiana Supreme Court, the highest court in the state of Louisiana. Thank you.
I tried to get him to say some really, really nice things about me, but he said, no, that really wouldn't be appropriate. You know, it's a great pleasure for us to be here. Of course, I live in Shreveport, and the court is in New Orleans, and Natchitoches is one of my favorite places, and we've been to the Christmas festival many, many times down here. And it's a great pleasure for the court to be here, and of course, this is a historic occasion because of the bicentennial of the Louisiana Supreme Court. And as you know, Louisiana became a state in 1813, and we will celebrate that 200th anniversary next year in March of next year. Before I get into a little bit about how the court works, let me just tell you the members of the court. Of course, I'm Justice Victory. Kitty Kimball, our Chief Justice, is here, and we have all the other members of the court here except Justice Johnson, Justice Knoll, Justice Weimer, Justice Clark, and Justice Guidry are all here, and we will begin hearing one of two cases in just a few minutes, and they'll be coming into the courtroom, or at least into the room, listening to the argument. You may not realize it, but Louisiana is one of the most advanced states in the country in its electronic ability to do things and to handle cases and so forth. And we have been recognized as being one of the most advanced states in the country. The Louisiana Supreme Court, of course, is a state court as opposed to federal courts. And the Louisiana Supreme Court is the highest court in the state of Louisiana, and we are the court of last resort with regard to Louisiana law. In addition to that, we would make the final decision on whether or not a statute that was passed by the legislature is constitutional or not. We govern all of the state courts in the state of Louisiana. We also have the responsibility of looking after all the lawyers in the state of Louisiana, and when somebody gets out of line, it's our responsibility to see whether or not there is some punishment that needs to be imposed, and sometimes we have to take away their licenses to practice law. The jurisdiction of the court, of course, is statewide. That is all of the state of Louisiana, and of course we get cases from all over the state. The rest of the Louisiana courts can only decide cases that are within their geographic area. The cases come to us usually by what is called a writ of certiorari. You know, a case starts in a trial court, like maybe a district court here with Rick or your other judges here in Natchitoches, and once that case is decided, then it would go to an appellate court if somebody decides to appeal, and then we are the court above the appellate court. And so usually there's only one judge in the trial court. In the appellate court, there may be 3 judges, sometimes more than 3. We used to do it a lot of times up in Shreveport, where the Second Circuit is, and I was on that court for several years. Sometimes when we would have a rehearing or we would have an en banc, 5 of us would be on that court. At the Louisiana Supreme Court, there are 7 of us, and all 7 of us sit on all cases. As I say, most of the cases come to us on what is called a writ of certiorari. They ask us to hear a case. For the most part, we're not obligated to hear very many cases, so we have to do a tremendous amount of reading to decide whether or not we want to hear a particular case. And the cases that will be argued today, we have granted a writ of certiorari, and the lawyers have come here to argue the cases. There are a couple of areas where we have to hear a case, and of course, probably the most prominent one of that is a death case. If the jury gives a defendant the death penalty, then it is an automatic appeal to the Louisiana Supreme Court, and we have to hear that. We cannot decide not to hear that. So why are we here in Natchitoches? Well, first of all, we're here because we like it. But there's, as Dr. Webb said, and you all know, this is the oldest city, I believe, west of the Mississippi, certainly the oldest in the Louisiana Purchase. When the Constitution of 1812 was passed, then there were 2 different districts for the Louisiana Supreme Court, the Eastern District and the Western District. One of them was always in New Orleans, the Eastern District, and it remains there, and of course the court is still there today. Early on, the court used to actually convene and hear cases in the Cabildo. I'm sorry, this robe is hot. And last spring, we actually had oral argument in the Cabildo on a case in honor of the 200th anniversary. Usually there were 3, at first there were only 3 judges on the Louisiana Supreme Court, and then they made that into 5 judges. But before that, people in the Western District on the court used to go on the circuit and ride, and they ended that, I believe it was in 1894. Of course, we don't do that anymore, but we do travel, and we had a policy before Katrina hit of trying to get around to all of the justice districts and hear arguments there. And we heard them in Shreveport and Monroe and in many states, many cities around the state. Back in the early days, as you know, federal judges are appointed. They're nominated by the President of the United States. They're confirmed if they are confirmed by the U.S. Senate. But in Louisiana, this is not true of all states, we elect all of our state judges, including on the Louisiana Supreme Court. But back in the early days, the justices were appointed by the governor, and then it had to be approved by the Senate. There is a historical significance to Natchitoches with the Louisiana Supreme Court, because shortly after the Civil War, the Louisiana Supreme Court held court here in Natchitoches for several years there. And looking at some of the notes that were prepared for us by our librarian down in New Orleans, we got the names of some of the justices that served here. And I was kind of surprised to see that many of these people did not vote for secession, and they were appointed by governors after the Civil War, and their history reflected some of that they were opposed actually to the Civil War. We're about to start the oral argument. Does anybody have any questions that I can answer about how the court operates? It's been a pleasure to talk to you today. The court will be in session in just a few minutes. Thank you.